Wed for peace, feared for his power, the alien queen watched a 27-year-old human turn the war. Humans and the Zyran Empire had been locked in a bitter war, spanning star systems and leaving countless worlds scarred and silent. Ships hung like silver specters in orbit around dying planets. Cities once filled with laughter and music now lay in ruins. The humans, resilient and determined, had fought bravely, but the Zyrans were relentless, powerful, cunning, and vast in numbers. Kale Arden, a 27-year-old human diplomat, had never wielded a weapon in anger. He had spent his life in negotiation chambers, studying languages, cultures, and the art of compromise. His reputation was not for battle but for thinking. It was said he could read a room better than anyone and find a solution where others saw only dead ends. Now, however, fate had thrown him into a role he had never imagined, a bridge for peace, and perhaps a symbol for a new future. The message arrived in the dead of night, carried by a fleet of silver couriers that blinked like stars in the distance. Kale read the encrypted message twice before he could believe it. The Zyran queen herself had proposed a political marriage, not as a joke, not as an insult, but a marriage, to Kale Arden. The council chamber erupted with voices as he shared the news. Some cheered, others whispered doubts. Kale remained quiet. He knew the weight of this mission. One wrong move, one misstep, and the fragile chance at peace would crumble. "Why me?" he finally asked aloud, his voice steady. "I'm not a warrior, I'm not a king, I'm a diplomat." The elder counselor, a stern woman with silver hair and eyes sharp as obsidian, studied him carefully. "Kale, that is precisely why the queen chose you. She fears the bold and respects the clever. You can navigate the Zyran court in ways soldiers cannot. You have a mind sharp enough to survive there, and perhaps even influence it." Kale swallowed hard. He had trained for diplomatic missions before, but never for this. The Zyran Empire was known for its unyielding rituals and secretive courts. The queen herself was a figure whispered about across galaxies, beautiful, intelligent, and feared for her power. Stories told of her strategic genius, her ability to command fleets with a single order, and her unflinching determination to protect her people. Packing for the journey, Kale felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. He studied Zyran customs late into the night, learning their complex gestures of respect, the proper ways to address different ranks, and the subtle ways they measured trust. Every detail mattered. A wrong word, a misstep, or even a pause at the wrong time could end his life, or worse, shatter the fragile hope for peace. The journey to the Zyran capital was long, spanning light years of silent space. Kale spent the time in quiet reflection, watching stars streak past the viewport of his transport. He thought of Earth, of the people he would leave behind, and of the hope that one human could influence a civilization that had never known peace with his own species. When he finally arrived, the Zyran capital was unlike anything he had imagined. The city floated above its planet in immense, gleaming structures, reflecting the light of three suns. Towers twisted like spirals of silver, and bridges of translucent crystal connected them in impossible arcs. Ships hovered in the air, silently gliding between docking platforms and orbital ports. The Zyrans themselves were tall, graceful, and imposing. Their skin shimmered slightly under the sunlight, and their eyes seemed to see far more than they let on. Kale stepped onto the main platform, his heart pounding, and was immediately surrounded by a ceremonial guard. Their armor was smooth and reflective, and their weapons, while never drawn, radiated an aura of warning. He realized quickly that every detail in this place was designed to impress, to intimidate, and to test him. The queen received him in a chamber high above the city. She was even more extraordinary than the stories suggested. Her hair glowed like molten gold, and her eyes were the color of deep emerald, sharp and calculating. She did not rise to greet him, but instead watched him with a quiet intensity that made Kale's chest tighten. "You are Kale Arden," she said finally, her voice calm, melodic, and carrying the weight of command. "The human, they say, can turn words into weapons." "I am he," Kale replied, keeping his tone respectful but steady. "I come to negotiate peace." The queen tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Peace is a fragile thing. One misstep and it can shatter like glass. Are you prepared to carry such weight?" Kale nodded. "I will do everything in my power." For the next several days, Kale was immersed in Zyran customs. He learned the rituals of dining, where even the placement of utensils mattered. He studied the language in its purest form, with words carrying subtle meanings lost to casual listeners. Every interaction was a test, and he felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon him, always judging, always calculating. It was not all formalities, however. The queen allowed him to observe her council meetings. Generals and ministers debated endlessly, their voices raised in fierce arguments. Kale noticed patterns, small cracks in their strategies, weaknesses that even the most experienced humans might overlook. He realized that he could help, not through force, but through intellect. One evening, as the three suns dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in colors Kale had no names for, the queen approached him privately. "You are different from what I expected," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Most humans are brash, predictable, or easily frightened. You think, you watch, you adapt." Kale bowed slightly, careful to respect her customs. "I have learned from my people that understanding is the first step toward change." The queen studied him for a long moment. "Perhaps, or perhaps you are simply lucky. Time will tell." As the days passed, Kale's presence began to stir unease among the Zyran Council. They whispered about the human who dared to question strategies, who suggested new tactics, who remained calm in the face of challenges no Zyran had faced before. Kale felt their suspicion like a weight pressing on his shoulders, but he did not falter. One day, a minor skirmish broke out on a nearby planet. Kale was allowed to observe the battle from the command center. He noticed that the Zyran fleet, while powerful, was vulnerable in certain formations. Quietly, he suggested a minor adjustment, one that the queen reluctantly allowed. The result was immediate. The Zyrans won without unnecessary losses. The council murmured in surprise, and the queen's eyes lingered on Kale longer than usual. "You may yet surprise me," she said softly, almost to herself. Kale realized something in that moment. This marriage, though political, was not simply about peace. It was about trust, about proving worth in a world where strength was measured not only in fleets or weapons, but in courage, intelligence, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. And Kale Arden, the human diplomat, had never faced a challenge like this before. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of determination, a spark that told him he could survive, not just survive, but thrive. Not just for himself, but for the countless lives that depended on him. As he stood on the balcony overlooking the floating city, Kale made a promise. He would learn, he would endure, and he would find a way to turn this unlikely union into a chance for peace. And perhaps, in doing so, he would show the galaxy that humans, clever and resilient, could achieve what others thought impossible. The first steps of his journey had been taken. The real test, the one that would shape the future of two civilizations, was just beginning. Kale Arden had survived the first week at the Zyran court. Every moment had been a test, every word carefully weighed. Yet he sensed that the hardest challenges were still ahead. The Zyran queen, Naira, had observed him quietly, her emerald eyes always calculating, always watching. He could feel the weight of her gaze in every council meeting, every ceremonial meal, and even in the silent moments when no one else was present. The first true test came during a high-level council meeting. The chamber was vast, circular and echoing, with walls of translucent crystal that shimmered in the light of the three suns. Zyran generals, ministers, and advisors filled the room, their tall forms moving gracefully, their voices a mixture of authority and tension. Kale took his place near the queen, aware that his every gesture was being judged. "The enemy fleet approaches the planet Tharian Prime," General Vrix announced, his voice low but commanding. "Our scouts report an advanced formation. We will crush them with superior firepower. That is the only strategy that guarantees victory." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council, and Kale studied the holographic map projected in the center of the room. The Zyran fleet was impressive, vast, precise, and terrifying, but Kale noticed something that the generals did not. There was a blind spot in their formation, a channel near the planet's surface where enemy ships could slip through undetected. If the humans controlled that channel, the entire fleet could be trapped. Kale raised his hand cautiously. "With your permission, I might suggest an alternative approach," he said, his voice calm and steady. The chamber went silent. Every eye turned to him, some with curiosity, some with thinly veiled suspicion. "You may speak," Queen Naira said, her tone measured, almost as if she were testing his courage. Kale explained his observation, pointing to the blind spot and suggesting a tactical adjustment. The plan was simple but risky. A small contingent of Zyran ships would block the channel while the main fleet feigned an attack elsewhere. If executed correctly, the enemy fleet would be trapped and neutralized with minimal losses. The generals exchanged uneasy glances. "It is untested," one said. "It could fail. We have never relied on a human strategies before." Kale met their eyes steadily. "I understand your concern, but I have studied your formations and patterns. The plan uses your own strengths against the enemy. It is calculated, not reckless." The queen remained silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Kale. Then she nodded slightly. "Very well, we will follow your plan, but know this: if it fails, you will bear full responsibility." Kale felt a chill run down his spine, but he did not flinch. The next hours were tense as the fleet moved into position. Kale observed from the command center, analyzing every move, every adjustment. Then the enemy appeared. Sleek, dark ships with weapons capable of destroying entire cities, approaching Tharian Prime with deadly precision. At first, it seemed as if Kale's plan might fail. Enemy ships maneuvered in unexpected ways, testing the Zyran defenses. But Kale remained calm. He issued minor corrections, communicated with the Zyran commanders, and watched as the trap slowly tightened. The enemy fleet, confident and overextended, moved straight into the channel Kale had identified. The result was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, the enemy was trapped, their ships immobilized and vulnerable. The Zyran fleet struck with precision, capturing or disabling every ship in the formation. The council erupted in astonished murmurs. Even the most skeptical generals could not hide their surprise. The queen's gaze lingered on Kale longer than anyone else. "You have done well," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Not many humans could think like this or act like this under pressure." Kale allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had survived his first real test and had proven his worth in the eyes of the queen. But he also knew that this victory had consequences. He was no longer merely a diplomat. He was a strategist, a human who could influence the outcome of war itself. That kind of power would bring attention, both positive and dangerous. Word of Kale's success spread quickly through the Zyran Empire. Whispers followed him wherever he went. The human, some said, who turned the war. Others regarded him with suspicion. "He is clever, yes, but cleverness can be dangerous. The queen must be careful." Kale sensed the tension. He was gaining respect, but he was also earning enemies. Days later, Kale was summoned to a private audience with the queen. He found her in a high balcony chamber overlooking the floating city. The suns were low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the room. The queen regarded him silently for a moment before speaking. "You have begun to make a name for yourself among my people," she said. "Some admire you, others fear you, and I," she paused, her emerald eyes sharp, I am not yet certain how I feel about you, Kale Arden. Kale nodded respectfully. I only seek to help, to find a way for our people to live without war. Naira's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity remained. And yet you have power, not through fleets or weapons, but through your mind. That is a form of strength few possess. You are unusual for a human. Kale felt a strange sense of pride mixed with caution. To impress the queen was one thing, to make her fear his potential was another. He realized that he must always be careful, always measured, and always aware that every action could shift her perception of him. The next challenge came in unexpected form. One of the Zyran generals, General Vrix, approached Kale with a thinly veiled threat. "Do not think your victory makes you equal to us," Vrix said, his voice low but dangerous. "You are a human. Clever, yes, but your life is still fragile here. Remember your place." Kale met the general's gaze calmly. "I understand my place, but I also understand that a plan is stronger when it saves lives. If we lose the war because we cling to old ways, who bears the greater responsibility?" Vrix's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing further. Kale realized that respect and fear often walked hand in hand. To influence the Zyrans, he would need both. Over the following weeks, Kale continued to observe and learn. He studied the Zyran military drills, noting their discipline and precision. He learned their communication methods, how subtle gestures and phrases could convey entire strategies in seconds. He also began to understand the culture of honor and loyalty that defined their society. In one of the more dangerous missions, Kale accompanied a fleet to a contested system where the enemy had set a trap. The human diplomats were not meant to be on the front lines, but Kale insisted. "I need to see how the enemy moves, how they think," he told the queen. "If we are to win, we must anticipate them." In the cold black of space, Kale watched the enemy maneuvers. He spotted a pattern, a rhythm in their attacks, and suggested a counter-strategy. The Zyran commanders executed it flawlessly. The enemy fleet was scattered, their morale shattered. Kale's reputation grew, and with it, the whispers of awe and fear. Through it all, the queen remained vigilant, her eyes always observing. She began to test him in more subtle ways, asking his opinion on council matters, presenting ethical dilemmas, and even challenging his loyalty. Kale met each test with intelligence, patience, and honesty, earning her cautious trust. By the end of the part, Kale had achieved something remarkable. He had survived the court, impressed the queen, and begun to change the course of the war, not with weapons, but with his mind. Yet he knew the journey was far from over. Allies and enemies alike watched him closely. Every decision carried weight. Every victory brought more scrutiny. And Kale Arden, the human diplomat turned strategist, felt the quiet thrill of a new purpose. He was no longer just a guest in the Zyran Empire. He was a force to be reckoned with, a spark of hope for peace, and a symbol of human ingenuity that even the most powerful queen could not ignore. The galaxy had begun to take notice. Kale Arden had earned respect, and even cautious admiration, within the Zyran Empire. Yet he quickly realized that respect came with a price. The palace corridors were not only filled with allies, but also with eyes that watched his every move, waiting for the slightest misstep. In the Zyran court, where power was measured by strategy and loyalty, enemies could hide behind smiles, and friends could conceal ambition. One morning, Kale was summoned by the queen to a council meeting that had an unusually tense air. The chamber hummed with quiet murmurs, and Kale immediately sensed that today would be different. The generals and ministers were present, their eyes narrowing subtly at him as he took his place beside the queen. "Kale Arden," Naira began, her tone calm but sharp, "there are concerns among some members of the council regarding your influence. They question whether a human should have a role in military decisions." Kale inclined his head respectfully. "I understand the concerns." My goal is not to take power from anyone but to assist in achieving victory with minimal loss of life. General Vrix, who had openly questioned Kale before, leaned forward, his expression tight. It is not simply a concern, human. Some of us fear your cleverness may disrupt the chain of command. This war is not a game. Lives are at stake. Are you certain you are prepared for the consequences of failure? Kale met his gaze without fear. I am. But I believe we can win this war if we combine human ingenuity with Zyron's strength. The only failure comes from refusing to adapt. The council remained silent for a moment. The queen studied Kale intently, her emerald eyes calculating. Then she spoke, "Very well. You will lead the next mission. If you succeed, you will have proven your worth beyond question. If you fail," her words hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Kale felt a surge of determination. This was no longer an observation or suggestion. He would be responsible for lives, for strategy, and for the trust of an empire. The mission was to secure the planet Korath, a strategic location that the enemy had fortified with hidden weapon stations and heavily armed garrisons. Kale spent days analyzing the available data, reviewing maps and coordinating with the Zyron commanders. He noted every defensive weakness, every patrol route, and every potential ambush. Then he devised a plan that balanced caution with boldness. On the day of the operation, Kale stood on the command bridge of the lead Zyron ship. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. He communicated with the fleet in concise instructions, adjusting tactics as enemy movements became apparent. The enemy had expected a standard frontal assault, but Kale's strategy was different. Using a diversion, he drew the bulk of the enemy forces away from the planet's main defenses, then sent a smaller contingent to infiltrate the weapon stations and neutralize them. It was risky, and one wrong calculation could lead to disaster. Hours passed in tense silence as the plan unfolded. Kale monitored every step, issuing quick adjustments when necessary. Slowly, the tide of battle shifted. The diversion worked perfectly, drawing enemy forces into the open. The infiltration team disabled the weapon stations, and the fleet closed in with minimal losses. When the battle ended, Kale allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The planet was secured, the enemy forces scattered, and the Zyron fleet remained largely intact. General Vrix, who had been skeptical from the start, approached Kale privately. His expression was unreadable. "You were fortunate," Vrix said quietly. "Or perhaps you truly are clever. Do not mistake this for full acceptance. Many still question your presence here." Kale nodded. "I am aware. I only ask for the chance to prove myself again when needed." But the success of the mission had not gone unnoticed. Whispers of Kale's growing influence spread through the court. Some admired him openly, praising his brilliance and foresight. Others, however, felt threatened. Subtle acts of sabotage began to occur. Reports were delayed, misinformation circulated, and small errors were blamed on Kale. He realized quickly that in an empire where loyalty was prized above all else, suspicion could be as deadly as enemy fire. Kale chose to confront the situation methodically. He documented every communication, verified every report, and worked closely with trusted officers to ensure accuracy. His human intuition allowed him to spot patterns in the sabotage attempts, patterns that the Zyron commanders overlooked. Slowly, he identified the source, a minor council member who had hoped to undermine him and regain influence over the Queen. Kale approached the Queen with the evidence. "Your Majesty," he said, presenting the carefully gathered reports, "someone within your council has attempted to disrupt operations. The errors were deliberate, but I have traced them and neutralized their impact." Naira studied the document silently. Then she looked at Kale, a faint smile forming at the edge of her lips. "You do not merely survive here, human. You navigate the currents of power with skill. That is admirable." Her acknowledgement gave Kale confidence, but he knew better than to let his guard down. The Zyran court was not forgiving, and every action carried consequences. Over the next weeks, Kale continued to integrate himself into Zyran military and political operations. He studied their strategy simulations, offered insights during council debates, and built relationships with those willing to listen. Slowly, he became more than a human guest. He became a trusted advisor, though trust among the Zyrans was always cautious, always measured. One evening, Kale was invited to dine with the Queen in a private chamber. The room overlooked the floating city, now bathed in the soft light of the three suns setting behind distant clouds. The atmosphere was calm, yet Kale sensed an underlying tension. "You have changed many opinions here," Naira said, her voice quiet but deliberate. "Some fear you, others respect you, and she paused, studying him, "I am not yet certain where I stand." Kale inclined his head respectfully. "I only wish to serve your majesty. To help protect your people and mine." Naira smiled faintly. "And yet service is never simple here. Power is measured by strength, by cunning, and by the ability to endure trials. You have endured much, Kale Arden, but the tests will continue. Some will try to turn allies against you. Others will test your judgment in ways you cannot yet predict." Kale nodded. "I am ready for whatever comes. I only ask that my actions be guided by what is right, not merely what is expected." The Queen's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity remained. "Perhaps that is what makes you different. Humans often rely on logic and morality where others rely solely on tradition. It is both a strength and a risk." As Kale left the chamber, he reflected on her words. Trust in this empire was earned slowly, and every achievement could bring new dangers. Yet he felt a quiet resolve growing within him. The challenges ahead were immense, but he believed in the human ability to adapt, to persevere, and to find solutions where others saw none. The next mission tested him in ways more personal than tactical. An enemy blockade threatened to cut off supplies to a critical colony. Kale was tasked with planning a rescue operation, coordinating both military and civilian resources. The operation required precision, timing, and careful negotiation with reluctant Zyran commanders. Kale spent hours studying the blockade, analyzing patrol patterns, and considering alternative routes. He devised a plan that balanced risk and reward. A small convoy would infiltrate the blockade under cover of darkness, while a decoy fleet engaged the enemy on the opposite side. The plan relied on timing, coordination, and trust that Kale had been building carefully with his Zyran allies. The operation began under a sky full of stars, the convoy slipping silently through the darkness. Kale monitored every movement, issuing precise instructions and adjusting the plan as the enemy reacted. The decoy fleet drew the majority of the blockade forces away, and the convoy successfully reached the colony, delivering much-needed supplies and saving countless lives. When the operation concluded, Kale allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had once been a diplomat, a man of words, not weapons. Now, he had proven that humans could lead, adapt, and succeed even in the most alien and dangerous environments. Yet the Zyran court remained a place of subtle tension. Some continued to plot, some continued to doubt, and some quietly observed Kale's growing influence. The Queen, however, had begun to see him as more than a clever human. She recognized his courage, his ingenuity, and his ability to survive trials that would have broken others. Kale realized something important. In this empire, survival required more than intelligence. It required patience, resilience, and an understanding of human and alien nature. It required earning trust without arrogance, proving worth without hubris, and navigating politics with care and precision. As he stood once more on the balcony overlooking the floating city, Kale felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had faced trials and earned respect, but the journey was far from over. Allies and enemies watched him closely. Every choice carried consequences. Every action shaped the future of two civilizations. And Cale Arden, the human diplomat and strategist, understood that his path had only just begun. The Zyran Empire had tested him, and he had endured. Now he would prepare for the next challenge. Knowing that every trial would demand courage, Cale Arden had faced intrigue, sabotage, and the doubts of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Yet nothing had prepared him for what came next. Reports from the front lines were urgent, almost frantic. The enemy had developed a new weapon, one capable of destroying entire planets. It was unlike anything the Zyrans or humans had encountered before, a technological marvel of destruction. Cale was summoned immediately to the War Council. The room was tense, filled with the finest minds of the Zyran Empire. Generals, scientists, and advisors spoke in urgent tones, but no solution seemed feasible. The enemy's weapon, they said, was unstoppable. Cale listened quietly, taking careful notes, observing every detail and thinking deeply. After the meeting, he requested a private audience with the Queen. "Your Majesty," he began, "we may not have to face this weapon blindly. There are patterns in its deployment, weaknesses that can be exploited, but it will require combining human strategy with Zyran technology." The Queen regarded him with sharp interest. "You speak as though you have already solved it, human. Do you?" Cale shook his head. "Not yet, but I believe we can. We need time, coordination, and the willingness to try a strategy that has not been tested before." Naira's eyes narrowed slightly, but a hint of approval was there. "Very well. You will lead this effort. Success or failure rests on your shoulders." Cale began immediately. He studied every detail of the weapon, gathering intelligence from spies, scouts, and scientists. Slowly, he began to see the pattern. The enemy's weapon relied on a network of control nodes scattered across their command ships. Destroying or disabling these nodes could neutralize the weapon entirely, but it required precision strikes in the heart of enemy territory. Cale called a meeting of the best Zyran commanders. He laid out his plan with clear diagrams and logical explanations. "We will use small, agile fleets to disable the control nodes while our main fleet feigns retreat. The enemy will focus on the apparent weakness, and when their attention is divided, we strike at the core. It is risky, yes, but it gives us a chance to end the threat without unnecessary destruction." General Vrix, still cautious, asked pointedly, "And if this fails?" Cale met his gaze evenly. "Then we adapt. Failure is not the end. Humans learn from mistakes quickly, and we will have contingency plans for every outcome." The Queen observed silently, her expression unreadable. Then finally she said, "Proceed. But know this, if the weapon is deployed fully before you act, it will destroy entire planets." "We have no margin for error." Cale's heart pounded, but he did not flinch. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. If he succeeded, countless lives would be saved and the course of the war would change forever. The fleet moved into position. Cale's strategy relied on timing and coordination. Every ship, every pilot, every maneuver had to be perfect. The first phase was a decoy attack. The enemy forces reacted exactly as Cale had predicted, committing the majority of their fleet to counter a seemingly vulnerable formation. The small strike teams, under Cale's careful guidance, slipped through enemy defenses. The control nodes glowed faintly in the darkness of space, each one crucial to the weapon's operation. Cale's team struck quickly and precisely, using both Zyran technology and human ingenuity. Minutes stretched like hours as Cale monitored the operation. One node remained heavily guarded, and a small error could trigger the weapon's activation. Cale thought quickly. Drawing from human logic, he devised a clever diversion, sending a decoy ship to create the illusion of a vulnerable target. The enemy responded immediately, diverting attention from the critical node. With nerves of steel, Cale ordered the strike. The node was disabled, and simultaneously the other nodes fell under the coordinated attacks. The enemy weapon, once unstoppable, went offline. The Zyran fleet seized the opportunity, striking decisively and scattering the remaining enemy forces. When the battle concluded, Kale allowed himself a moment to breathe. The weapon had been neutralized, the enemy fleet broken, and countless lives spared. He had done what many thought impossible. He had turned the tide of the war with intelligence, courage, and strategy. The Queen observed him as the reports came in. "You have exceeded my expectations, Kale Arden," she said softly, though her voice carried authority. "You do not simply survive here. You shape the outcome of events, something few could achieve in my lifetime." Kale felt a quiet sense of pride, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The enemy would regroup, and challenges would continue. Yet in that moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his accomplishment. He had shown that humans, clever and resourceful, could match the greatest powers of the galaxy. News of Kale's victory spread quickly across the Zyran Empire. He became a symbol not only of hope for humans, but also of possibility for the Zyrans. Whispers of admiration and awe followed him wherever he went. The generals who had doubted him now approached with cautious respect, eager to learn from his insights. But not everyone was pleased. Some members of the council feared the growing influence of a human. They saw Kale's intellect, courage, and ability to inspire loyalty as a threat to their own positions. Subtle plots began again, though Kale had grown adept at detecting them. He documented every unusual report, verified every claim, and used logic and observation to neutralize attempts at sabotage before they could escalate. The Queen, meanwhile, had begun to see Kale in a new light. He was no longer merely a clever human or a political ally. He was a strategist capable of making life-and-death decisions, a partner in shaping the future of two civilizations. She still measured his abilities carefully, aware that power, even human ingenuity, could change the balance of her empire. One evening, she summoned Kale to a private observation deck overlooking the city. The suns had set, leaving the floating city bathed in soft, silver light. Ships glided silently through the sky, and the stars above twinkled faintly, as if observing the quiet triumph below. "You have done more than I expected," Naira said, her voice calm but intense. "You have neutralized a weapon that could have destroyed worlds. You have inspired loyalty, challenged doubt, and proven that humans can act decisively in ways we did not anticipate." Kale bowed slightly, careful to follow protocol. "I only acted with what I observed and understood. It was the combined efforts of your fleet and mine, guided by strategy and precision." Naira's eyes softened, though they still held their sharp edge. "And yet it was you who saw the possibilities others could not. You have changed the war, Kale Arden. For that, you have my recognition." Despite her words, Kale sensed that his journey was far from over. The enemy would continue to fight. New challenges would arise, and the balance of trust within the Zyran Empire remained fragile. Yet he felt something he had never experienced before, a quiet certainty that humans, with intelligence, courage, and adaptability, could influence even the most alien and powerful civilizations. In the following weeks, Kale began coordinating larger campaigns. He integrated human strategies with Zyran technology, finding ways to outmaneuver the enemy while minimizing destruction. He focused not on brute force alone, but on innovation, observation, and clever tactics. The results were remarkable. The Zyran fleet moved with efficiency and precision previously unseen, and enemy morale began to crumble. The Queen watched all of this with a mixture of admiration and cautious concern. Kale's abilities were extraordinary, yet she remained vigilant. Power, even that of a human, could shift the course of an empire in unexpected ways. But for the first time, she allowed herself to consider Kale not merely as a guest or diplomat, but as an essential partner in shaping the future. Kale, for his part, never allowed pride to cloud his judgment. Every mission, every plan, and every decision was measured carefully. He knew that trust had to be earned continually, that respect could be fragile, and that enemies, both external and internal, would always watch closely. Yet he also knew the truth. Humans could adapt, endure, and overcome in ways that others often underestimated. As he stood once more on the observation deck, looking at the city of silver towers and floating ships, Cale felt the quiet satisfaction of achievement. He had faced impossible odds and succeeded. He had turned the war in favor of humans and Xyrans alike. And yet, he knew the final tests were still to come. The galaxy had begun to recognize the spark of human ingenuity, the quiet strength of Cale Arden, and the possibilities that could arise when courage met intelligence. The tide of war was turning and the seeds of peace were being sown, not through fear but through strategy, resilience, and trust. Cale knew that the coming days would demand more from him than ever before, yet he was ready. With courage, intelligence, and determination, he would continue to shape the war, the empire, and the future of two civilizations. The turning of the war had begun. Cale Arden had changed the course of the war. From a human diplomat to a strategist who had neutralized the enemy's devastating weapon, he had proven that intellect and courage could rival even the greatest military powers of the galaxy. Yet he knew that the final challenge was not a battle in space, but the delicate negotiation of peace. The Xyran Empire and human colonies had fought for decades, and centuries of distrust could not be undone with words alone. Cale understood this. He had spent months observing both cultures, learning their fears, desires, and principles. If peace was to last, it would need to be carefully crafted, not imposed. The Queen summoned him to the War Council one morning. The room was tense, filled with Xyran generals, diplomats, and a few human advisors who had traveled with Cale. Nyra's emerald eyes met his. "Cale Arden," she said, "the enemy is weakened, their fleet scattered. Now it is time to negotiate. But know this, these talks will be as dangerous as any battle. One wrong word could reignite war." Cale nodded. "I understand. I will approach this as I have every challenge, carefully, with patience and with clarity." Preparations for the negotiation were immense. Envoys from both sides gathered on neutral ground, a space station orbiting a planet unclaimed by either humans or Xyrans. The station was vast and sleek, designed for diplomacy and security. Cale reviewed every detail, from seating arrangements to communication protocols. In war, small errors could have deadly consequences. In diplomacy, they could shatter fragile trust. The enemy representatives arrived, their demeanor cautious and wary. Cale observed them closely, noting subtle gestures, tones, and reactions. His human intuition allowed him to read beyond words, to sense hidden tension and unspoken intentions. The first session was formal, almost stiff. Statements of grievances, accusations, and demands were presented. Cale listened quietly, taking notes, asking clarifying questions when necessary, and observing every reaction. He knew that patience was his greatest weapon here. The enemy would test him, and any sign of weakness could be exploited. During a break, Cale spoke privately with the Queen. "Your Majesty, they are still wary but not unreasonable. If we approach this with clear terms, respect, and fairness, I believe we can secure a treaty that lasts." Nyra nodded thoughtfully. "And if they try to deceive us?" Cale smiled faintly. "We will adapt. That is what humans do. We find patterns, anticipate reactions, and respond logically." Over the next several days, Cale led the negotiations with precision. He presented proposals that balanced human and Xyran interests, emphasizing mutual benefit rather than dominance. When disputes arose, he used calm reasoning to de-escalate tension, pointing out practical solutions rather than arguing ideologically. Slowly, the mood in the chamber began to shift. One evening, during a particularly heated session, The enemy envoy accused the Xyrans of unfair advantage in the recent battles. Voices rose, tempers flared, and it seemed that the talks might collapse. Kale intervened, his voice steady and firm. "Let us not allow anger to dictate our future," he said. "We all seek stability, safety, and prosperity for our people. That goal is larger than any single dispute. If we approach this logically, we can find a solution that respects both sides and prevents further conflict." He presented a detailed plan for shared resources, joint patrols in contested regions, and a phased withdrawal of forces from key planets. He showed charts, projections, and step-by-step plans, emphasizing transparency and mutual accountability. The clarity of his approach, combined with his calm demeanor, diffused the tension. Slowly, the representatives began to nod in agreement. The Queen observed silently, her gaze intense. She had seen humans before, but Kale was different. He combined intellect with courage, patience with decisiveness. He did not seek to dominate but to resolve, not to show power but to use it wisely. For the first time, she allowed herself to trust him completely. After several days of negotiation, Kale proposed a final session to draft the peace treaty. The representatives gathered in a large chamber, each aware that this moment would shape the future of the galaxy. Kale presented the terms clearly and concisely. Territorial boundaries were to be respected, military forces would be reduced in contested regions, and trade and cultural exchange would be encouraged. The treaty included mechanisms for communication and conflict resolution to prevent misunderstandings from reigniting hostilities. The enemy representatives reviewed the terms carefully. Kale answered their questions with patience, demonstrating transparency and fairness. When concerns arose, he offered solutions without compromise to the core principles. Slowly, the treaty took shape. Finally, the day came for the treaty to be signed. The chamber was filled with representatives from both sides, along with neutral observers from distant systems. Kale and the Queen stood together, a symbol of unity and partnership. "You have done well, Kale Arden," Nyra said quietly, her hand resting briefly on his arm. "You have shown the galaxy what humans are capable of: brilliance, courage, and the ability to unite even in the face of centuries of conflict." Kale nodded respectfully. "I only acted as any human would, to survive, to learn, and to find solutions. The true credit goes to those willing to work together for peace." The signatures were made, the treaty ratified, and a wave of relief passed through the chamber. For the first time in decades, a sense of hope filled the air. The humans and Xyrans were bound not by war but by a mutual desire for peace. News of the treaty spread quickly across the galaxy. Colonies and planets celebrated cautiously, aware that true peace required time to solidify. Yet the story of Kale Arden, a human who had turned the tide of war, earned the respect of the Xyran Empire, and brokered peace, became legendary. Back in the Xyran capital, Kale walked alongside the Queen through the floating city. The towers glowed in the sunlight and ships glided silently in the sky. Citizens paused to look at them, whispers of admiration and awe following their steps. Kale felt the weight of his journey, the challenges he had faced, and the victories he had earned. "You have changed more than this city or this empire," Nyra said softly. "You have changed perceptions of humans, of what is possible, and of what the future can hold." Kale smiled. "Perhaps. But the real change comes from those willing to work together, to understand each other, and to act with courage and fairness. That is what makes peace lasting." The Queen regarded him with quiet approval. "I once feared your potential," she admitted. "Now I respect it. Perhaps in time even more than that." Kale felt a warmth in her words, a recognition not of power alone but of character. He had not sought fame or dominance, only to act wisely, courageously, and with integrity. Yet in doing so, he had shaped the destiny of two civilizations. In the weeks that followed, Kale continued to work with the Queen and her advisors, overseeing the implementation of the treaty. Trade routes reopened, joint scientific projects began, and cultural exchanges brought humans and Xyrans closer than ever. Former enemies began to see each other not as threats, but as partners in a shared future. Kale also continued to mentor young diplomats and strategists, both human and Xyran, sharing his experiences and encouraging innovation, cooperation, and moral leadership. He knew that peace was fragile, and that the lessons of war must not be forgotten. Yet he also knew that humans could adapt, endure, and inspire change even in the most alien and powerful civilizations. As the sun set over the floating city, Kale stood once more on the observation deck. The Xyran towers shimmered in golden light, and the ships glided silently through the air. He reflected on the journey, the doubts, the battles, the challenges, and the victories. He had faced trials that tested intellect, courage, and patience. He had earned respect, navigated intrigue, and forged alliances that seemed impossible months before. Most importantly, he had proven something profound. Humans, even one human, could change the course of history. Intelligence, ingenuity, empathy, and determination were as powerful as any weapon. The galaxy had learned that lesson, and Kale Arden had been the one to show it. The Queen joined him quietly, standing at his side. "Do you think peace will last?" she asked. Kale looked out at the city, at the ships, at the people moving below. "It will, if we continue to act wisely. Peace is built not in a single moment, but in every choice we make afterward. Humans and Xyrans alike have a chance to shape a better future." Naira nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Then we will watch it grow together." Kale smiled, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. The war was over. The galaxy had been shown the strength of intelligence, courage, and unity. And a single human, with vision and determination, had changed everything. He turned his gaze toward the stars, knowing that challenges would always exist, but also knowing that the spark of human ingenuity could illuminate even the darkest reaches of the universe. For Kale Arden, the journey had not ended, it had only just begun. The galaxy, once torn by war, now held a fragile hope, and that hope was forged in the actions of a human who dared to lead, to think, and to believe in the possibility of peace.